Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about flying serpents, mostly. Once more, we have Roddy Fry to thank for tonight's show. He wanted to hear about the tassel worm and flying serpents, so here's the second show in his request list. Birds are supposed to fly. Bats fly, but some folks think they're creepy. I like bats. I had a bat house mounted on the eaves of the house at one time, and nobody ever moved in. Just about anything else seen flying around looks wrong. Flying humanoids, flying fish, and flying serpents. Some of y'all might remember flying toasters, but, well, that's another thing. People have seen flying serpents way back when the only way to record sightings was in print or drawings. In the Bible, Numbers 21, the Israelites begin to grumble about the lack of normal food and water in the wilderness as they're walking along trying to get around the desert to the promised land. God's response was harsh. In Numbers 21:6, it says, God sent serpents against the people. They bit them, and many of the Israelites died. So the people turned to Moses to intercede with God, which he does. It says, the people came to Moses and said, we sinned by speaking against God and against you. Intercede with God to take away the serpents from us. And Moses interceded for the people. In response, God offered a magical way to survive the snake bite. Then God said to Moses, make a seraph figure and mount it on a standard. If anyone who is bitten looks at it, he shall recover. Moses made a copper serpent and mounted it on a standard, and then anybody that got bit would turn and look at this copper snake on a staff, and it would help them recover. I don't understand why God didn't just remove the serpents instead of adding a symbolic cure, but I wasn't around back then. Maybe there's something else going on that we don't know about. There are lots of things mentioned in the Bible that, to us, in modern days, don't make a whole lot of sense. It was lost in translation, you might say. The staff Moses had made was topped by the image of a snake with wings. In Deuteronomy 8:15, Moses warns the Israelites not to take for granted all the benefits bestowed upon them by God, including God's protection during the dangerous wilderness crossing. I've heard a lot of people ask why it took so long to travel from Egypt to the Promised Land. They didn't take a straight line. The Israelites were being punished for losing faith in God, and so they wandered around, sometimes in circles, never being allowed to arrive at their destination until God decided to let them. The Bible says it took 40 years. In Hebrew, the term 40 doesn't mean 40 as in right after 39. The number 40 shows up repeatedly in the Bible. Christ was in the desert for 40 days. The Israelites waited to enter the Promised Land for 40 years. Jewish kings are noted as ruling for 40 years. This repeated number is often taken at face value by many Christians. Lent is 40 days long in memory of Jesus' time in the desert. The number 40 does not actually mean 40 in the Bible. In ancient Hebrew, the number 40 is used as a stand-in for many. So Jesus was in the desert for many days. It can also be used to represent a generation. The number 40 then is less a specific quantity in the Bible, but used more like a modern word, forever, or an age, or a long time. You stand in line at the coffee shop for 40 days, waiting to get your cup of joe. Something like that. Don't say that. People will think you're crazy. The description of flying serpents in the desert is not unique to the 8th century prophet Isaiah. An account of the campaign against Egypt conducted by the 7th century BC Assyrian king Esarhaddon mentions snakes with deadly breath and yellow flying serpents. Likewise, the Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, writes of flying serpents that inhabited the Arabian desert and apparently frequently attacked Egypt. The seraph sounds like a type of venomous desert snake that some texts describe as being able to fly. This usually makes modern-day scholars try to translate the ancient writings into words describing other things. The snakes weren't flying as in moving through the air, they were flying as in moving fast. People have a hard time accepting the possibility of creatures doing things they don't like. Snakes should not fly, so therefore they don't. This is like saying, I don't like it, so it can't be true. Creationists over the years have suggested that the flying reptile creature was a living pterosaur, still known in the region of Palestine at the time of Isaiah's prophecy. Bible commentators have differed in their interpretation of these passages. For example, E.J. Young writes of Isaiah 14:29, "From one snake will come a poisonous serpent, and that poisonous serpent will produce another that is burning and flying." Sounds kind of like a dragon, doesn't it? He holds that Isaiah 36 references a real winged serpent and cites Herodotus and Ammianus Merculinus. Oh, one of those Latin words. Marcellinus, I believe that's how it's pronounced. I always get a lot of emails from people telling me the correct pronunciation for various words that I stumble over. And I've said this before. I will actually go to a website and I will listen to how the word is supposed to be pronounced. I'll listen several times, and sometimes I'll even put down a little note saying it's pronounced this way. And then when I get in front of the mic and start recording, well, my tongue gets stuck to my teeth or something. But anyway, Ammianus Marcellinus, or something like that. If I'm wrong, don't tell me. Herodotus was an ancient Greek writer born in 484 BC in the ancient Greek city of Halicarnassus. He became a geographer and historian. Accredited as being the first Greek historian, Herodotus is known for having written the Histories, a detailed account of views regarding the Greco-Persian Wars. Ammianus Marcellinus was born in the year 330. He became a Roman soldier and historian who wrote the major historical accounts surviving from antiquity. His work, known as the Res Geistanae, chronicles in Latin the history of Rome from the accession of the Emperor Nerva in 96 to the death of Valens at the Battle of Anthropolis in 378. Both of these men told about flying serpents that were found in the desert regions of the Middle East. Herodotus wrote, "There is a place in Arabia, situated very near the city of Buto, to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. When I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantity as it would be impossible to describe. It is reported that at the beginning of spring, winged serpents fly from Arabia towards Egypt, but that the ibises, a bird, meet them at the pass and do not allow the serpents to go by, but eat them. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and as like as possible to the wings of a bat." In his third volume, Herodotus goes on to tell how these animals could sometimes be found in the Arabian spice groves. He describes their size, coloration, and reproduction. It seems flying serpents were infamous for hanging in frankincense trees. When workers wanted to gather the tree's incense, they would employ putrid smoke to drive the flying reptiles away. Ammianus Marcellinus wrote in one of his scrolls, "Among Egyptian birds, the variety of which is countless, the ibis is sacred, harmless, and beloved by the reason that by carrying the eggs of serpents to its nestlings for food, it destroys and makes fewer of those destructive pests. These same birds meet the winged armies of snakes which issue forth from the marshes of Arabia, producing deadly poison, and before they leave their own land, vanquish them in battle in the air and devour them." Birds fighting flying snakes. Gaius Plinius Secundus, born in the year 23, was known as Pliny the Elder. He was a Roman author, a naturalist, and natural philosopher, a naval and army commander of the Roman Empire, and a friend of Emperor Vespasian. He wrote the Encyclopedic Naturalis Historia, or Natural History, which became an editorial model for the encyclopedias of today. He spent most of his spare time studying, writing, and investigating natural and geographic phenomenon in the field. Pliny wrote, "The Egyptians also invoked their ibis against the incursions of serpents, and the people of Elis, their god Maegros, when the vast multitudes of flies are bringing pestilence against them. The Assyrian monarch Esarhaddon recounts how he marched south to the desert, where serpents and scorpions covered the plain like ants. And he recorded seeing yellow serpents that could fly as he marched to fight against Taharka, king of Egypt and Nubia." Many of the ancient authors like Aristotle, Philae, Matthew of Edessa, Cicero, and Aristotle, I mentioned him twice, all reference flying serpents. I referenced Aristotle twice because his name is easy to pronounce. Oops. Archaeological artifacts from ancient time provide evidence of pterosaur worship. A plate found with Sennacherib's treasure trove depicts a winged serpent. Sennacherib was the king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire Try saying that 6 times real fast. From the death of his father Sargon II in 705 BC to his own death in 681. A pterosaur was not a serpent, but in some of the earliest inscriptions, the description of flying creatures sometimes were a bit similar. The long-necked Quetzalcoatlus is a member of the family Ashardichidae, a family of advanced toothless pterosaurs with unusually long, stiffened necks. Seeing a creature with a long neck, it could be mistaken for being a serpent or vice versa. If the name sounds familiar, it's because this pterosaur was named after Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. A Quetzalcoatl, or the plumed serpent, was one of the most important gods in ancient Mesoamerica. A mixture of bird and rattlesnake, his name is a combination of the Nahuatl word quetzal, the emerald plumed bird, and cotl, or serpent. Quetzalcoatl was the god of winds and rain, and the creator of the world as well as humanity. Further indications of the religious significance of the pterosaur symbol comes from the multiple flying serpent seals recovered from Judea, Lachish region. These artifacts have caused biblical scholars to link the idolatrous flying serpent worship as being part of the reason that God allowed Lachish to fall to Assyria, while at the same time preserving King Hezekiah and Jerusalem. Historical references to pterosaurs have been made in more recent times as well. Four of the leading naturalists of medieval Europe, Ulysses Androvandi of Italy, Conrad Gessner of Switzerland, Edward Topsell of England, and Pierre Bellon of France reference flying serpents. A story that came from the Middle Ages gives an account of bright flying serpents. The woods around Penlyn Castle, Glamorgan, had the reputation of being frequented by winged serpents, and these were the terror of old and young alike. Penlyn Castle is a Norman architectural castle located in Cowbridge, 4 miles southeast of Bridgend, South Wales. An inhabitant of Penlyn said that in his youth the winged serpents were described as very beautiful. They were coiled when resting or asleep and looked as if they were covered with jewels. Some of them had crests sparkling with all the colors of the rainbow. When disturbed, they glided swiftly to their hiding places. When angry, they flew over people's heads with outspread wings that looked like the feathers in a peacock's tail. The witness said it was no old story invented to frighten children, but a real fact. His father and uncle had killed some of these flying creatures because they were preying on their poultry. This old man attributed the extinction of the winged serpents to the fact that they were terrorizing the farm workers. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in 793, Archdeacon Henry of Huntington said, "These were exceptional flashes of lightning, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the air, and soon followed a great famine." 19 years earlier, in 774, red signs appeared in the sky after sunset, and horrid serpents were seen in Sussex with great amazement. They really had a way of speaking back then that, well, a bit weird sounding to us today. A lot of things that happened back then were a bit weird sounding to us. At least to me. Roswell is sitting on my desk staring at me as if she's about to go into one of her rants. I hope she's calm. Maybe the catnip has set in. April 1388, The Knightons Continuator, I guess that's a newspaper, ran several stories about flying dragons being seen in the sky in several places. The Italian naturist Prosper Alpine wrote about a natural history of Egypt in the 1580s. He describes flying creatures with tails as long and thick as with tails that were long and thick as a person's finger, their length being as long as a palm branch, or about 3 or 4 feet, with a leaf-shaped end. The description was very close to a pterosaur. There's a French woodcutting image dated from the 17th century displays remarkable features of a pterosaur, including the tail vein, that's that leaf-shaped structure on the end, a crest, and claws on the wings. Christopher Skrorum, that's how it's spelled, Christopher Skrorum wrote, "On a warm night in 1619, while contemplating the serenity of the heavens, I saw a shining dragon of great size in front of Mount Pilatus, coming from the opposite side of the lake. Moving rapidly in an agitated way, it was of a large size with a long tail, a long neck, a reptile's head, and ferocious gaping jaws. As it flew, it was like iron struck in a forge, with scattering sparks. At first I thought it was a meteorite, from what I saw, but after I diligently observed it alone, I understood it was indeed a dragon from the motion of the limbs and the entire body. A dragon was said to have lived near Rome back in December 1691. According to the story, the animal inhabited a cave and terrorized the local population. After its demise, a sketch of the skeleton survived in the possession of Ignario Cornelio Mayer. It seemed to be a pterosaur specimen. There is clear indication of a head crest. There are 5 digits visible for each foot. The upper arm bone can be seen at the front of the wing, as well as a hint of the front and upper arm of the near wing. The membranous wings are shown in front of the legs on the vertebrae matching the fossils. The femur is properly shown as a single bone. The tibia and fibula, the twin lower leg bones, are visible as well. Some have suggested that it could be a fossil or a faked composite, but it is much too accurate to be considered a fabrication. The survival of the skin suggested that it is not a fossil, since it includes accurate wing features, a head crest, and reptilian ears. December 5th, 1762, a twisting serpent lit up the sky as it slowly descended and vanished over Bedford, Devonshire, England. It was visible for about 6 minutes. For being visible for so long, unfortunately, nobody bothered to write down an accurate description of what it looked like. In his 1828 American Dictionary of the English Language, Noah Webster sought out the derivation of the word dragon among the ancient medieval roots. He concluded, "Hence I infer that the word originally signified a shooting meteor in the atmosphere, a fiery meteor, and hence a fiery or flying serpent, from a root which signified to shoot or draw out." His first definition of the word dragon was a kind of a winged serpent which celebrated in the romance of the Middle Ages. In the years 1857 and 58, there were stories of flying serpents that hovered over a Missouri River steamboat, which was slowing down in order to stop at a landing. The report said, "In the late dusk it was like a great undulating serpent. in and out of the lower clouds, breathing fire. It seemed with lighted streaks along its sides. June 1873, farmers near Bonham, Texas, sighted an enormous serpent in a cloud. They told their stories to the Bonham Enterprise. The account goes, it seemed to be as large and as long as a telegraph pole, was a yellow striped color, and seemed to float along without any effort. They said they could see it coil itself up, turn over, and thrust forward its huge head as if it was striking at something, displaying the maneuvers of a genuine snake. The cloud and serpent moved in an easterly direction and were seen by folks a few miles this side of Honey Grove. In a Kansas newspaper, the Fort Scott Monitor, June 27th, a strange and remarkable phenomenon was observed at sunrise yesterday morning. When the disk of the sun was about halfway above the horizon, the form of a huge serpent, apparently perfect in form, was plainly seen encircling it and was visible for some moments. 1882, there was a sighting of a sky serpent reported in the Gridley Herald. The story was told by two lumberjacks, Thomas Camp and Joseph Howard. At 4 p.m. on March 10, 1882, they were startled by the sound of wings flapping in the air. They had been busy cutting wood 5 miles northeast of Hurlton, California. Looking up, the men saw a creature that looked something like a crocodile, 40 feet above their heads. Believing the creature was about to attack, Howard fired a shotgun at it. The pellets hit their target, only to make a sound as if they had struck sheet iron. The creature uttered a cry similar to that of a calf or a bear, combined, but it gave no sign of being injured or even realizing it was being shot at. Camp went on to say, there were a number of other men working in the area who also saw the thing. The Herald concluded the account with a statement confirming or affirming that Campbell and Howard were reliable men who should be taken at their word. They used to put in comments like that in newspaper articles. The man was a sober and intelligent individual. They don't say things like that today. Instead, they usually insult people, it seems. Another sky serpent story comes from a man who wrote into the paper. He signed as R.B. in a letter to the editor in the Frederick News, a Maryland newspaper, on November 29, 1883. His letter said, at 6:30 one morning, he had been standing on a hilltop when he saw, over Croatoan Mountain, a monstrous dragon with glaring eyeballs and a mouth wide open, displaying a tongue which hung like a flame of fire from its jaws. It reared and plunged into the ground. People used odd ways of speaking back then. A short article in the New York Times, published May 27, 1888, tells the story of 3 sisters in Darlington County, South Carolina, who were walking in the woods when they spotted a hissing 15-foot serpent sailing above the treetops. The creature was moving at about the speed of a hawk or a buzzard. The Times noted that other residents of the area had reported the same phenomenon earlier in the day, although they provided very few details. John B. Rosa told about an 1897 sighting he had in Detroit. He sent his story into the city newspaper. Going down Grand River for my papers about 4 in the morning. The policeman I was with and I saw an object that looked to be about 3 feet in diameter. It was about 1,000 feet in the air and was heading east. It was a silvery color and had a tail that was about 3 blocks long. It traveled like those great big sea serpents you read about, skimming over the tops of the water. It made a low hissing noise that we could just hear. My dad, who was leaving our home for work, also saw it as it seemed to pass right over our house on Rivard between Leland and Alexandrian. F.W. Holliday wrote a book, The Dragon and the Disc, in 1973. In it, he said the ancients had it right. Nessies and their relatives, sky serpents, are dragons in the most literal traditional sense. They are supernatural and evil. He goes on to link dragons with UFOs, which have a sort of symbiotic relationship with these creature sightings. From the Indians, a feather, not dot, pioneers and traders heard reports of flying serpents. The Crow Indians had a number of stories of the thunderbird, which they clearly differentiated from the eagle. In about 1880, Chief Medicine Crow made a drawing of multiple reptilian creatures, including a snake with wings. In 1870, a young warrior named Goes Ahead encountered a strange creature that he thought was a bird, which was flying awkwardly. It fell to the ground, and he saw that although it had wings, it was not a bird, but more like a serpent, kind of lizard-like. The creature had a long, heavy body, a serpentine with wings something like that of a dragonfly, and a tail. These Native American reports, largely from the western United States and Mexico, have continued even down to the present time. 1882, California. A train engineer and fireman, that's the guy that shoveled the coal, saw a huge serpent while traveling past Dos Palmas, which is now known as the Mojave Desert. Many of the passengers say they saw the creature as well. As the train passed by the desert in extreme south-central California, the engineer was looking to the east. He could see what at first looked like a column of sand rising up from the ground. The sand was moving along, heading in a westward direction, right next to the railroad tracks. The engineer thought it must be some kind of a dust devil or something like that. As they got closer to each other, the sand turned out to be a serpent. It was a huge serpent, positioned vertically with its tail dragging the ground. It was propelled by 2 large wings up near the head. The creature looked to be about 30 feet long and 12 inches in diameter. As the serpent and train passed each other, the train clipped off a part of the tail. Angered, the serpent rapidly turned and began pursuing the train. It dived down on the rear of the train, smashing several windows, roaring and beating its wings and frightening the passengers. The few passengers who were armed began firing at the winged creature. Even though the creature was right on top of the passengers, none of the rounds seemed to do any damage. After smashing around the passenger car a few more times, the flying serpent leaped up into the sky and sailed away. Once at the station, everybody on board the train was questioned, and they all told basically the same story. The Pittsburgh Chronicle printed a report made by workers at a pipe mill in Etna, Pennsylvania, an industrial settlement across the river. In mid-September 1887, a number of men loitered outside the factory while on their break. A welder named William Stewart glanced up into the sky where he saw a strange sight. At about 2,000 feet up, he saw a snake, guessed to be about 5 feet long. Thinking he was just imagining it, William said nothing to the men with him. He did glance up on a occasion, just wanting to see if the thing had finally disappeared, when suddenly he noticed it was only 500 feet away. He alerted his companions to its presence. They all looked up at what was now about a 25-foot long snake flying through the air. The serpent was jet black, about 25 feet long, and as big around as a keg, maybe a foot to 16 inches. The jaws of the beast were seen to open, from which emerged a large tongue. It sailed in a regular course, but when the jaws opened, it took a downward course and seemed as though it was falling to the ground. On the descent, the mouth remained open. After a fall of about 100 feet, the jaws would close and the snake would rise its head and slowly make its way back up to its former height. The creature was flying in a northwesterly direction. It then would circle back around, passing over just about every part of the city. The men said they watched it for nearly an hour. As it flew, the serpent's body moved just like it was crawling on the ground. As it got close to Allegheny River, it would turn and fly back to where it had first been seen. Eventually, the flying serpent moved out of view. The workers were very shook up by the sighting, but they still had to go back to work. In July 1897, the Charleston News and Courier mentioned a sighting of what they called a flying snake. It was sighted twice on July 11th near Newman Swamp, 10 miles south of Hartsville, at 6 and then again at 7 o'clock. One witness, identified as Henry Paulson, is quoted as saying, "The monster was low down, just above the treetops, had its head thrown back in a position to strike, and was just floating through the atmosphere lengthwise. It could have been anywhere from 25 to 40 feet in length. The creature was also seen near Chesterfield Courthouse and also in several towns in North Carolina." In mid-1890s, people were reporting airships flying around the skies. It wasn't until 1900 that German military officer Ferdinand Zeppelin invented a rigid-framed dirigible or airship. There were balloons flying around, but they all looked like balloons, not airships. The earliest documented use of a weather balloon was by French meteorologist Léon Tessorenc de Bort. He launched the first weather balloon in 1896. His work was instrumental in determining the existence of the troposphere and the stratosphere. Seeing something that looked man-made was far from seeing something that looked alive. Folks were reporting seeing flying serpents, and they all said they were alive. Eden, Utah, July 20th, 1894, one creature flew over their town. It was around sundown when an immense flying beast about 60 feet from head to tail, 18 inches diameter, sailed from the mountains to the north over the town. It did not wiggle as if it were flying, but floated tranquilly through the sky at a speed estimated to be about 40 miles an hour. After descending to 20 or 30 feet above the ground near a store on the edge of the park, it turned left and disappeared up over the mountains in the direction of Middle Fork Canyon. The movement of the monster was like a snake in the water, and it seemed to acquire speed without any effort whatsoever. Its skin seemed to be made from scales like an alligator. The account was vouched for by a number of Eden's residents who say the weird flying serpent. About half of the townspeople had seen this creature. 1895, the St. Louis Republic ran a story saying, A number of persons living in the vicinity of Redley, Fresno County, California, all reputable citizens, swear that they have seen and hunted two dragons with wings 15 feet long, bodies without covering of hair or feathers. Their heads are broad, they have bills that are long and wide, eyes no less than 4 inches in diameter, and with feet like those of an alligator. They have 5 toes on each foot with a strong claw on each. Its tracks are 11 inches wide and 10 inches long. The article went on to say the witnesses were all seeing dragons flying overhead. The creatures first spotted southeast of Selma early on the evening of July 11th. The witness said the creature could be heard roaring as they flew, and the sound of their wings could still be heard long after the beasts were no longer visible. July 13th, the creatures were accused of attacking and eating chickens belonging to a farmer called A.X. Simons. On the evening of the 19th, some folks heading home from a picnic saw what they described as a dragon. The people were traveling down the road in a buggy when the dragon passed overhead. It was very visible in the bright light from a full moon. The witness said they heard what sounded like the creature snapping its jaws as it flew. Two hog farmers, Henry Height and Harvey Lemon, saw the creatures under a bridge near Selma. The dragons rose out of the water and flew so low over the men that they felt the backwash from their wings. Fearing the dragons might decide to feast on some of the inhabitants, the citizens formed a watch. At sundown, armed members would get together and patrol the fields and the farms looking for the flying dragons. When a farmer reported having several of his ducks killed by the dragons, the watch dug some holes in the ground near the pond so they could hide and wait for the dragons to return. The men of the watch sat in the holes and they waited to see what would happen. The report goes, about 11 o'clock the cries were heard in the direction of Kings River, a seeming 2 or 3 miles away. The ominous yells drew nearer, and in a few minutes we heard the rush and the roar of the wings, so hideous that our hair stood on end. The two dragons came swooping down and circled around and around the pond in rapid whirls, screaming hideously all the while. We had a good view of them while they were flying. They passed within a few yards of us, and their eyes were plainly visible. We could also see that instead of bills like birds, they had snouts resembling that of an alligator, and their teeth could be seen as they snapped their jaws while passing. They were probably examining the pond to determine if any food was to be had, such as ducks, mud hen, and fish. At length they came down with a fearful plunge into the pond, and the mud in the water flew as though a tree had fallen into it. They dived around in the water, and as nearly as we could judge, at a distance of 30 yards, they were something of over 6 feet long, and while wading through the water they looked not unlike gigantic frogs. Their wings were folded and appeared like large knobs on their backs. Their eyes were the most visible part and seemed all the time wide open and staring. They were very active and darted out among the tulls and the rushes, catching mud hens. As soon as we saw a good opportunity, we leveled our guns at the one nearest us and fired. One rose in the air, yelling, and flew away. Every stroke of the wings showed great strength. The other floundered about in the water until it reached the end of the pond, when it crawled out, dragging along its wounded wing after it, and started across the plain. We loaded our guns and gave chase. We soon lost sight of it, for it went much faster than we could. However, we were able to follow by its dismal cries in the distance. We followed it for half a mile when it passed out of our hearing. The next day, a company went in pursuit of the dragon and trailed it by the blood in the grass. It was followed for 3 miles to Jumper Slough, which was entered, and all trace of it was lost. When it passed down the bank, it left several well-formed tracks in the mud. One of the best was cut out with a spade, and after drying was taken to Selma, where it is in the possession of Mr. Snodgrass. Back in the 1800s and early 1900s, it was all the thing to have what was known as a cabinet of curiosities. Folks would collect all manner of oddity and put them on display, showing them off to visitors. These were not for public view, only friends and acquaintances. Once the owner had passed on, sometimes relatives would sell off or simply throw out the odd artifacts, thinking they held no value to anyone other than their dearly departed. I wonder how many valuable artifacts wound up in the trash simply because the people cleaning out the house didn't think they were worth anything. On the afternoon of September 16, 1904, in the countryside near Troutman, North Carolina, Mrs. John B. Lepard and her children saw 30 or more large snakes sailing through the air over their farm. Each was about 5 feet long and 4 to 5 inches across. They watched the snakes sail around the sky before landing in a thick section of pine woods. Silas Italica, born in 1934, wrote that a serpent, glittering with rough spots of gold, was seen to glide through the sky between the clouds, tracing a furrow of fire in the heavens. Reports of pterosaurs come from around the world, including the Congo-mato of Zambia and Kenya, and the thunderbird of the western United States. One of the most promising locations to see flying pterosaurs is Papua New Guinea, or PNG for short. During World War II, Dwayne Hodgkinson was stationed east of Lae near Finchhaven as part of an Army weather observation unit. About noon one day in August, he was walking up a trail, and he came to a grassy clearing in the forest. He was startled by a crashing in the brush. As he watched, a large bird-like creature rose from the ground, circled, and flew away. Hodgkinson, a pilot, estimated the wingspan to be about 20 feet. He clearly recalls the dark gray coloration, long serpentine neck, a beak, and a distinctive head crest. It reminded him of the cartoon Alley-Oop. Hodgkinson remarked to his associates that it resembled a pterosaur. Alley-Oop was a syndicated comic strip created on December 5, 1932 by American cartoonist V.T. Hamlin. Hamlin wrote and drew the strip for 4 decades for Newspaper Enterprise Association. Hamlin introduced a cast of characters, and his storylines entertained with a combination of adventure, fantasy, and humor. Alley-Oop, the strip's title character, lived in a prehistoric kingdom of Mu. He rides his pet dinosaur Denny and carries a stone axe, and he wears a fur loincloth. Back when I was young, we used to read the Alley-Oop comics in the Sunday papers, but that was a long time ago. If you visit a lot of old used bookstores, sometimes you'll find copies of collections of comics like that. As Western missionaries began to penetrate the deep jungles and remote islands of PNG, stories of a flying creature called the ropin, or demon flyer, began to be reported. Described as a nocturnal nocturnal creature, the ropen possesses two leathery wings like a bat with a hand on the end of each wing, a long tail with a diamond-shaped flange on the end, and a very prominent beak. The creature is thought to still inhabit the islands of New Britain and Umboy, located in the Bismarck archipelago. Archipelago. The ropen is said to have a taste for decaying flesh. Reports of harassment at native funeral gatherings at the government station of Lob Lob on Umboy and other attempts to disinter corpses suggests that the ropen is a carrion animal. PNG natives will even put tin roofs over fresh graves to deter the creature. A veteran missionary pilot, Jim Bloom, tells of numerous credible encounters that New Guinea natives conveyed to him over the 30-year period. These reports regarding the ropen cover a wide geographical range. 150 miles southeast of his Wau mission station, down the coastline to Papandada, and as much as 250 miles north up the coast to Wewak. They speak something called pidgin in that area, and if you've never heard anybody speak pidgin, you should Google it or look it up on YouTube and just listen to people speaking pidgin. It's entertaining, if nothing else. The inhabitants of PNG speak many dialects, and each linguistic group have a different name for a flying creature that is being seen all over the island. The names are all very different, but the basic descriptions are the same. There are a consistency in the accounts from around the island region, coming from people that do not have any communication links. The most remarkable part of the description is that the creature is reported to have a bioluminescence capability, kind of like a firefly, a giant firefly. It seems that the ropen possesses the ability to turn its internal lights on and off at will. Reports suggest the presence of a secretion that drips from the creature's underbelly when it is seen glowing. These secretions are alkaline and they burn the skin of those who come in contact with the creature. The historian Ailanus wrote about flying snakes in India that were snakes with wings, and these creatures flew at night. As they flew, the snakes would urinate, sending out a stream of liquid that burned anybody unlucky enough to get it on their skin. Snake pee that burns. On one expedition to PNG, Bloom and Bao followed up on reports from a particular island in the Manus group that said these creatures were living in caves dotting the island. While in a boat in the early evening, they observed what appeared to be an oval-shaped luminescence flying object gliding from the hillside down along the bay. After observing the pulsing light, greenish light, and also looking through the monocular nightscope for about 20 minutes, they lost contact with the object. The next morning, Bao snapped a photograph of a strange clawed print that they found on the muddy beach. In 1987, Tyson Hughes was an English missionary. He was stationed for an 18-month contract to assist the Moluccan tribespeople of Seram Island, Indonesia, to develop efficient farming. Tyson heard stories about a terrifying creature called the Orang Bata, which means men with wings, that possesses enormous leathery wings like a bat, and it lives in the caves of Mount Krakatu, an extinct volcano situated in the center of the island. In Indonesia, there are fox bats that have up to a 6-foot wingspan. These bats are kind of welcomed by the people because they knock ripe fruit out of trees. The orang bata is quite clearly a different animal. then the locals know what a bat looks like. When describing the orang bata, they talk about a totally different creature, something that sounds a lot more like a pterosaur. Maybe not a flying serpent, but seeing something in the sky you can't identify, they might just be mistaken as to what the creatures were. In Chesterton, Indiana, 2019, a police officer spotted something flying overhead. He said, "As I was heading to work, driving north on 1050 north in Chesterton, I noticed a very odd, strange looking flying thing approaching over my vehicle. As it flew past, I saw something that I've never seen before and something I can hardly explain. The creature was 4 to 5 feet long, and it flew in the air almost like how a snake moves on the ground. The tail of it looked almost like how a peacock tail would look with feathers on it. The head of it looked like a fish with sharp teeth coming out of it, and it had a very small, what seemed to be almost like bat wings that were flapping. As a police officer, this was the scariest, most freakish thing I've ever seen in my life. I told my wife about it, and we tried looking for the creature up on Google, but found nothing until I came across this article, and saw that this man had said he had seen it. I'll never forget the day I saw this creature. It's so crazy that even explaining and talking about it, because I don't have a clue what it was that I was seeing. The article the officer was referencing might have been a pterosaur, spotted flying over Wheaton, Illinois, which was published July 2019. A handful of pterosaur sightings have been received out of Gary, Indiana, a city on the southern shore of Lake Michigan, within the past several years, including a total of 4 sightings made by a husband and wife from 2015 to 2016. 2 more recent sightings reported of an unexplained flying creature from September 28th and January 29th. September 2018 and January 2019 also were made. Gary is less than 20 miles to the west of Chesterton, Indiana. If you live in Indiana, up around Lake Michigan, you might want to keep your eyes on the skies. My wife and I drove through there one time when we were heading to Elkhorn, Indiana to see the RV museum, but unfortunately, we didn't get to see much of the sky. It was overcast and rainy. During the STS-105 mission, August 2001, a shuttle Discovery caught something on one of their cameras. It looked exactly like a snake flying through the air below the space shuttle. The image is very clear. It looks like nothing other than a snake. There's no way to judge how big the snake was, since there's no way of telling how far from the lens it was. If it was close, then the snake would have been in space. If it was far away, in Earth's upper atmosphere, it would have to have been enormous. NASA doesn't have any kind of an answer for how a snake could be flying close to the space shuttle. Even if they did, I wouldn't listen to them. Never a straight answer. A strange snake-like UFO has emerged in recent years. People around the world have seen them. Many witnesses and ufologists believe these objects are organic, since they move in the air like a serpent on the ground. This has led to a new acronym, UAB, Unidentified Aerial Biological Entity. If we keep this up, all we're going to do is confuse ourselves and everybody else. UFO, UAP, UABE. Let's face it, UFO covers just about everything seen in the sky that is unknown. If you are in Japan and you say UFO, people are going to know what you're talking about. If you're in Russia and you say UFO, People are going to understand that you're talking about something flying up in the sky. If you're in Brazil and you say UFO, people are going to know what you're talking about. By coming up with these new and confusing ways of saying the same thing, we're not doing anybody a service. Come on, folks, knock it off. The witnesses of the snake-like UFO, sometimes called sky serpents, state that the elongated tube-like object appears to be alive. They report these objects appear to be huge and extremely long, saying the oddly shaped UFOs undulate through the air with serpent-like movements in coordinated and contorted shapes. Ufologists speculate that these unique UFOs could be an undiscovered atmospheric worm or snake. The sky serpents have been reported as being black and gray or white. A few seen in Mexico were reported as being multicolored. Some snake UFOs are seen in groupings that wreath to various shapes, similar to how a serpent moves. On YouTube, a man captured a huge white sky serpent that seems to be giving birth in the sky. In a nearly 15-minute long video, the serpent wreathes and wiggles about in the sky. The serpent appears to give birth to two small, round, white objects. A couple of times, the offspring hover around the mother, eventually floating or flying away. Now, the camera isn't stable, so it's difficult to view. Folks do this all the time. They see something incredible and grab their cell phone to catch an image. Then they try to hold the camera out at arm's length and they keep the object in frame and focus. Firstly, would you all please turn the camera sideways so the video is made the same as a movie or a TV screen? When the video is shown on anything other than a phone, it has to be framed by blurry side pieces so that the image will fit the screen. Next, try resting the camera on something solid, anything that you can rest your arms on. This will keep the image steady. Zooming in and out a few times is okay, but try to keep the image to one size for as long as possible. Makes trying to figure out what it is a lot easier. I've seen some YouTubers where they'll zoom in and out and in and out and in and out so many times that you start to get dizzy. Lastly, try to make comments that will make watching the video a little more interesting. Yelling, "Oh my God," over and over, or saying, "What is that thing?" just makes for a lousy experience. Try telling where you are while you're making the video. What time is it? And if there's anyone around who is also watching. Months or years down the road, this will help a lot. Think to yourself, what kind of information will help others figure out what you're looking at and when and where it was spotted? Another YouTube compilation reveals 5 sky serpents. One was filmed in New York and another one in Ireland. The other 3 videos are believed to have been filmed in the United States, but there's no documentation and no audio saying where they were filmed. Each of the serpents appear to be about the same color and size. The video sightings span a 10-year period. If the person doing the filming had told when and where the images were captured, it sure would have helped. There's a Reddit member who posted a short snake UFO video that her daughter took outside a hotel in Kissimmee, Florida. Good, they've got a location. The object is elongated and undulating against the dark clouds. It appears to reflect or emanate brilliant light. The object shimmers and seems to expand with several pulses. The UFO then begins to ascend or disappears into the clouds. The video was made February 10th, 2020, a date to reference, at a hotel located near Polynesian Island Boulevard around 4:15 p.m. We've got some information, so if somebody else was in the neighborhood and saw something, they could say, yes, I was there at the exact same time and I saw the same thing. This helps. While doing any cryptid, ghost, or UFO investigations, it's really a good idea to have a notebook along. As you click your pictures, put down a few notes on when and where the photos were taken. Simple things like photo of a door in the basement or room full of furniture on the second floor. Jot down the time so a few years down the road you can tell us a few more details. Audio recorders are great for quick notes, but once you get home, you should review them and make a hard copy. Audio recordings have a bad reputation for vanishing over the years. You grab your handy dandy audio recorder and you make a quick recording of an EVP, then you realize that you just recorded over an EVP that you'd made 10 years ago, and now you've lost that copy. So, you want to review these things and make a hard copy. Some of the Reddit users commented suggestions, things like they thought it was a NASA rocket launch. Cape Canaveral is only about 50 miles away, so seeing something shooting up into the sky is not that unusual. Some of the comments mentioned that there was a space launch that same day. A few speculate this could be a NASA stratospheric weather balloon launch. Ah, yes, the old weather balloon explanation. You'd think people would stop using the same old thing. Try something new, like saying it was, oh, I don't know. How about it was a Macy's Thanksgiving parade balloon that got away, has been seen drifting around for the last 3 months? Have you all ever heard about that giant pink flying pig in Australia? It was a Pink Floyd concert, and one of their props got away, and well, that was an interesting story, but I better not get into that. One YouTube video features various snake like UFOs recorded throughout Mexico. The narrator describes how white disk UFOs often accompany or lead the worm like objects through the sky. They describe how they have occasionally observed the disk UFOs being ejected from the Serpent UFOs. They admit they don't know the how or the why of the process, but they speculate the snake UFOs provide some form of access, similar to a wormhole or a portal. See, a good story that goes along with what is being seen. Well, Jaime Maussan was doing the talking, but still, it made watching the video so much better. Reports of UFO sightings, along with what look like snakes and serpents, have been coming in from all over the place. Some of these UFOs are said to look like flying jellyfish. As these jellyfish are moving through the sky, small glowing orbs are seen coming from them. This has led to witnesses calling these the motherships. One report told how the orbs formed into a triangle shape before moving away from the jellyfish or mothership. Flying creatures that resemble snakes have to be some of the weirdest things on Earth. I'm sure some of these sightings were simply folks wanting to pull pranks on others. With so many people seeing things up in the sky, there has to be something more to it than just people hoaxing us. If you enjoyed tonight's show, you might want to check out the archives on iHeartRadio or Spreaker.com. You can also find me on YouTube, Stitcher, Podomatic.com. I'm all over the place, it seems. If you want to get a hold of me, I can be reached at strangethings@arcanasa.com. Send me any suggestions you have for a show in the future or any stories you'd like to see in my next book. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight? night in the hanging tree.